Hi, this is Ryan P. Dalnay, a student of Northeastern Mindanao State University, former Surigao del Sur State University. And for today's video, I'm going to discuss the topic types of speciation, evolution, and isolation. This is one of the topics covered in evolution subject. Types of speciation, evolution, and isolation. But before we head out to the final deal of this video, let's first have an objectives. At the end of the discussion, viewers or learners are expected to define speciation, evolution, and isolation, know the different types of speciation and evolution, as well as the types of isolation, distinguish how each type is different to each other, and know the difference of analogous and homologous structures. So what is speciation? When we say speciation, it is the formation of new and distinct species in the course of evolution. Speciation is how a new kind of animal species is created. Speciation occurs when a group within a species separates from other members of its species and develops its own unique characteristics, just like in the picture. And there are types of speciation. We have allopatric speciation, sympatric speciation, and parapatric speciation. Allopatric speciation. New species evolves as a result of geographic isolation. So there is a geographical barrier. In allopatric speciation, groups from an ancestral population evolved into separate species due to a period of geographical separation or geographical barrier. Example is the south side Harris antelope squirrel and the north side white-tailed antelope squirrel. So when Arizona's Grand Canyon formed, squirrels that had once been part of a single population could no longer contact and reproduce with each other across this new geographic barrier. Second, sympatric speciation. New species evolves from single ancestor while living in the same geographic niche. Niche is organism's place in ecosystem. So in sympatric speciation, groups from the same ancestral population evolved into separate species without any geographical separation. Just like in the example, the apple maggot lays its eggs inside an apple, causing it to rot. As the apple falls from the tree, the maggots dig in the ground and emerge as flies later. The original hawthorn species still only lays its eggs in hawthorn apples. The next, we have parapatric speciation. New species evolves as a result of partial geographic isolation as a result of occupying a new or different niche. So there is a partial spatial isolation. In parapatric speciation, it occurs when new species evolve in contagious yet spatially segregated habitats. Unlike allopatric speciation, the populations that are diverging during parapatric speciation maintain a zone of contact and do not cease the exchange of genes completely. Just like the example, some grass grow around mines are tolerant of heavy metals in the soil. Meanwhile, neighboring grasses don't live in polluted soil, but they occupy a continuous geographic population. The two grasses have evolved different flowering times, or nights. Next, so what is evolution? Evolution is a biological process. It is how living things change over time and how new species develop. It also explains how modern organisms have descended from ancient organisms. So there are types of evolution. So we have divergent evolution, convergent evolution, parallel evolution, and co-evolution. So, divergent evolution. New species evolves from a common ancestor, so there is a parent species. In divergent evolution, it refers to the process by which interbreeding species diverge into two or more evolutionary groups. It means that these groups of species used to be similar and related. However, they became more and more dissimilar through time. Example of divergent evolution, we have red fox and kit fox. So the kit fox lives in the desert where its coat helps disguise it from its predators. The red fox lives in forest where its red coat blends into its surroundings. The next we have convergent evolution. Unrelated species become similar as they adapt to similar environments. Convergent evolution is when different organisms independently evolved similar traits. For example, the sharks, dolphins, and the ichthyosaur look relatively similar despite being entirely unrelated. So that's convergent evolution. Then next we have parallel evolution. Development of a similar trait in related but distinct species descending from a common ancestor. So example is the woolly mammoth and the modern elephants. So the woolly mammoth and the modern elephant both share a similar structural appearance of their trunk and tusk. They share a common ancestor and develop similar traits. Then last we have co-evolution. Co-evolution is the influence of related or closely related or associated species on each other in their evolution. Coevolution is the process of reciprocal evolutionary change that occurs between pairs of species or among groups of species as they interact with one another. Example is the hummingbirds and the flowers they pollinate. The longer the beak of the hummingbird, the more food it will get. The farther away the food in the flower, the better the flower gets pollinated. Then under evolution is analogous structure and homologous structure. Analogous structure. Structures present in different organisms that have the same function but are structurally different and have different origins. So here, the fin, the wing, and flipper of these species have the same function but they differ in origins and structure. Then next, we have homologous structure. Structures present in different organisms that have the same underlying structure but may have different functions. So the structure of these species, they have the same structure, but they differ in the functions or they have different functions. So what is isolation? Isolation means that organisms of the same species are separated and happens when there is something between the organisms that they can't cross. Organisms become isolated as a result of environmental change. They eventually become different species. So there are types of isolation. We have prezygotic isolation and postzygotic isolation. In prezygotic isolation, there are four examples of prezygotic isolation. We have geographic isolation, behavioral isolation, mechanical isolation, temporal isolation. So prezygotic isolation. Reproductive isolation preventing a zygote. So anything that prevents mating and fertilization is a pre-zygotic mechanism. Examples, as I've said earlier, we have geographic, behavioral, mechanical, and temporal. So example of prezygotic isolation. Number one, geographic isolation. When a population is divided into two or more smaller populations due to physical barriers. So geographic isolation is a mechanism of speciation that happens when populations of a species are divided by a geographic barrier. This can occur when rivers change course, mountains rise, continents drift, or organisms migrate. For example, we have northern spotted owl and Mexican spotted owl. So due to geographic barrier, these species developed a unique traits. Then second, we have behavioral isolation. Two species do not mate because of differences in courtship behavior. So, behavioral isolation is a type of prezygotic barrier that prevents interbreeding because closely related species, there is no mate recognition between females and males of the different species. For example, we have blue-footed boobies, mating dance, birds, mating song, nocturnal versus diurnal. So, blue-footed boobies select their mates only after an elaborate courtship ritual, which is unique to them. Then third, we have mechanical isolation. Mechanical isolation is a type of reproductive barrier that prevents mating from happening. So, mechanical isolation, we have the snail. So, the genital opening of these snails are not aligned and mating cannot be completed. So, number four, we have temporal isolation. When it comes to temporal isolation, time is the barrier that prevents species from interbreeding and producing sterile hybrids. So, when two or more species reproduce at different times. Then last, we have post-zygotic isolation. So, reproductive isolation that occurs after two species have mated. So, post-zygotic isolation prevents the formation of fertile offspring. So, just like, for example, the hybrid mule, offspring are infertile. So, when horse and donkey mate, they produce a hybrid, which is mule, which cannot reproduce. So, that's all for today, and thank you for listening.